Chapters 44 to 48 of Tristram Shandy, Volume 3. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Life and Opinions of Tristram Shandy, Gentleman, Volume 3, by Laurence Sterne. Chapter 44. We'll not stop 2 moments, my dear sir, only as we have got through these 5 volumes. In the first edition, the 6th volume began with this chapter. Do, sir, sit down upon a set. They are better than nothing. Let us just look back upon the country we have passed through. What a wilderness has it been, and what a mercy that we have not both of us been lost or devoured by wild beasts in it. Did you think the world itself, sir, had contained such a number of jackasses? How they viewed and reviewed us as we passed over the rivulet at the bottom of that little valley, and when we climbed over that hill, and were just getting out of sight. Good God, what a braying did they all set up together! Prithee, shepherd, who keeps all those jackasses? Heaven be their comforter. What, are they never curried? Are they never taken in winter? Bray, bray, bray. Bray on. The world is deeply your debtor. Louder still. That's nothing. In good sooth, you are ill used. Was I a jackass, I solemnly declare I would bray in G, so ray O, from morning even unto night. Chapter 45. When my father had danced his white bear backwards and forwards through 6 pages, he closed the book for good and all, and in a kind of triumph re-delivered it into Trim's hand, with a nod to lay it upon the scrutoire, where he found it. Tristram, said he, shall be made to conjugate every word in the dictionary, backwards and forwards, the same way. Every word, Yorick, by this means, you see, is converted into a thesis or an hypothesis. Every thesis and hypothesis have an offspring of propositions, and each proposition has its own consequences and conclusions, every one of which leads the mind on again into fresh tracks of enquiries and doubtings. The force of this engine, added my father, is incredible in opening a child's head. 'Tis enough, brother Shandy, cried my uncle Toby, to burst it into 1,000 splinters. I presume, said Yorick, smiling, it must be owing to this, for let logicians say what they will, it is not to be accounted for sufficiently, from the bare use of the 10 predicaments, that the famous Vincent Quarino, amongst the many other astonishing feats of his childhood, of which the Cardinal Bembo has given the world so exact a story, should be able to paste up in the public schools at Rome, so early as in the 8th year of his age, no less than 4,550 different theses, upon the most abstruse points of the most abstruse theology, and to defend and maintain them in such sort as to cramp and dumbfound his opponents. What is that, cried my father, to what is told us of Alphonsus Tostatus, who almost in his nurse's arms learned all the sciences and liberal arts, without being taught any one of them? What shall we say of the great Pierscius? That's the very man, cried my uncle Toby, I once told you of, brother Shandy, who walked a matter of 500 miles, reckoning from Paris to Scheveling, and from Scheveling back again, merely to see Stevinus' flying chariot. He was a very great man, added my uncle Toby, meaning Stevinus. He was so, brother Toby, said my father, meaning Pierscius, and had multiplied his ideas so fast, and increased his knowledge to such a prodigious stock, that if we may give credit to an anecdote concerning him, which we cannot withhold here, without shaking the authority of all anecdotes whatever, at 7 years of age his father committed entirely to his care the education of his younger brother, a boy of 5 years old, with the sole management of all his concerns. Was the father as wise as the son? Quoth my uncle Toby. I should think not, said Yorick. But what are these, continued my father, breaking out in a kind of enthusiasm, what are these to those prodigies of childhood in Grotius, Scioppius, Heinsius, Politian, Pascal, Joseph Scaliger, Ferdinand de Cordoue, and others, some of which left off their substantial forms at 9 years old or sooner, and went on reasoning without them. Others went through their classics at 7, wrote tragedies at 8. Ferdinand de Cordoue was so wise at 9, 'twas thought the devil was in him, and at Venice gave such proofs of his knowledge and goodness that the monks imagined he was Antichrist, or nothing. Others were masters of 14 languages at 10, finished the course of their rhetoric, poetry, logic, and ethics at 11, put forth their commentaries upon Servius and Martianus Capella at 12, and at 13 received their degrees in philosophy, laws, and divinity. But you forget the great Lipsius, quoth Yorick, who composed a work. Nous aurions quelque intérêt, says Baillet, de montrer qu'il n'a rien de ridicule s'il est toi véritable, au moins dans le sens énigmatique que Nicias Erythraeus a tâché de lui donner. Cet auteur dit que pour comprendre comme Lips, il a pu composer un ouvrage le premier jour de sa vie. Il faut s'imaginer que ce premier jour n'est pas celui de sa naissance charnelle, mais celui auquel il a commencé d'user de la raison. Il veut que c'était à l'âge de 9 ans, et il nous veut persuader que ce fut de cet âge que Lips fit un poème. L'auteur est ingénieux, etc., etc. The day he was born. They should have wiped it up, said my uncle Toby, and said no more about it. Chapter 46. When the cataplasm was ready, a scruple of decorum had unseasonably rose up in Susanna's conscience about holding the candle whilst Slop tied it on. Slop had not treated Susanna's distemper with anodynes, and so a quarrel had ensued betwixt them. Oh, said Slop, casting a glance of undue freedom in Susanna's face, as she declined the office. Then I think I know you, madam. You know me, sir, cried Susanna fastidiously, and with a toss of her head, levelled evidently not at his profession, but at the doctor himself. You know me, cried Susanna again. Dr. Slop clapped his finger and his thumb instantly upon his nostrils. Susanna's spleen was ready to burst at it. 'Tis false, said Susanna. Come, Mrs. Modesty, said Slop, not a little elated with the success of his last thrust. If you won't hold the candle and look, you may hold it and shut your eyes. That's one of your popish shifts, cried Susanna. 'Tis better, said Slop, with a nod, than no shift at all, young woman. I defy you, sir, cried Susanna, pulling her shift sleeve below her elbow. It was almost impossible for two persons to assist each other in a surgical case with a more splenetic cordiality. Slop snatched up the cataplasm. Susanna snatched up the candle. A little this way, said Slop. Susanna, looking one way, and rowing another, instantly set fire to Slop's wig, which, being somewhat bushy and unctuous withal, was burnt out before it was well kindled. You impudent whore, cried Slop, for what is passion but a wild beast? You impudent whore, cried Slop, getting upright with the cataplasm in his hand. I never was the destruction of anybody's nose, said Susanna, which is more than you can say. Is it? Cried Slop, throwing the cataplasm in her face. Yes, it is, cried Susanna, returning the compliment with what was left in the pan. Chapter 47. Dr. Slop and Susanna filed cross-bills against each other in the parlour, which done, as the cataplasm had failed, they retired into the kitchen to prepare a fomentation for me, and whilst that was doing, my father determined the point, as you will read. Chapter 48. You see 'tis high time, said my father, addressing himself equally to my uncle Toby and Yorick, to take this young creature out of these women's hands, and put him into those of a private governor. Marcus Antoninus provided 14 governors all at once to superintend his son Commodus' education, and in 6 weeks he cashiered 5 of them. I know very well, continued my father, that Commodus' mother was in love with a gladiator at the time of her conception, which accounts for a great many of Commodus' cruelties when he became emperor. But still I am of opinion that those 5 whom Antoninus dismissed did Commodus' temper, in that short time, more hurt than the other 9 were able to rectify all their lives long. Now I consider the person who is to be about my son as the mirror in which he is to view himself from morning to night, by which he is to adjust his looks, his carriage, and perhaps the inmost sentiments of his heart. I would have one, Yorick, if possible, polished at all points, fit for my child to look into. This is very good sense, quoth my uncle Toby to himself. There is, continued my father, a certain mien and motion of the body, and all its parts, both in acting and speaking, which argues a man well within, and I am not at all surprised that Gregory of Nazianzum, upon observing the hasty and untoward gestures of Julian, should foretell he would one day become an apostate, or that St. Ambrose should turn his amanuensis out of doors because of an indecent motion of his head, which went backwards and forwards like a flail, or that Democritus should conceive Protagoras to be a scholar from seeing him bind up a faggot, and thrusting, as he did it, the small twigs inwards. There are 1,000 unnoticed openings, continued my father, which let a penetrating eye at once into a man's soul, and I maintain it, added he, that a man of sense does not lay down his hat in coming into a room, or take it up in going out of it, but something escapes, which discovers him. It is for these reasons, continued my father, that the governor I make choice of shall neither vide Pellegrina, lisp, or squint, or wink, or talk loud, or look fierce, or foolish, or bite his lips, or grind his teeth, or speak through his nose, or pick it, or blow it with his fingers. He shall neither walk fast, or slow, or fold his arms, for that is laziness, or hang them down, for that is folly, or hide them in his pocket, for that is nonsense. He shall neither strike, or pinch, or tickle, or bite, or cut his nails, or hawk, or spit, or snift, or drum with his feet or fingers in company, nor, according to Erasmus, shall he speak to any one in making water, nor shall he point to carrion or excrement. Now this is all nonsense again, quoth my uncle Toby to himself. I will have him, continued my father, cheerful, facete, jovial, at the same time, prudent, attentive to business, vigilant, acute, argute, inventive, quick in resolving doubts and speculative questions. He shall be wise and judicious and learned, and why not humble and moderate, and gentle-tempered and good, said Yorick. And why not, cried my uncle Toby, free and generous and bountiful and brave? He shall, my dear Toby, replied my father, getting up and shaking him by his hand. Then, brother Shandy, answered my uncle Toby, raising himself off the chair, and laying down his pipe to take hold of my father's other hand, I humbly beg I may recommend poor Lefevre's son to you. A tear of joy of the first water sparkled in my uncle Toby's eye, and another, the fellow to it, in the corporal's, as the proposition was made. You will see why when you read Lefevre's story. Fool that I was! Nor can I recollect, nor perhaps you, without turning back to the place, what it was that hindered me from letting the corporal tell it in his own words. But the occasion is lost. I must tell it now in my own. End of chapters 44 to 48.